Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have award-winning author Ken Waldman with us. Ken is an author and a musician. He plays the fiddle, and he has authored 24 books that include poetry collection, a memoir, a short story collection, and a creative writing manual. Today, we're going to be talking about his novel, Now Entering Alaska Time. Ken, welcome to Zoom into Books.
Kathy, so happy to be here today.
Well,
So
thank you.
happy.
Thank you for coming. Ken is also a Reader's Favorite International Book Award winner. Those were just recently announced. So, Ken, this is a very interesting novel. So, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and how this novel came about.
Well, the whole thing has been a bit of an accident. I've been touring, traveling as Alaska's fiddling poet for years. I have an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I wasn't born and raised in Alaska. I grew up on the East Coast outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And when I went to college, it was as far away as I could imagine, which was 7.5 hours south to, to Durham, North Carolina, where I was a business major at Duke University. And when I got through, this was back, I'm in my 60s now. So this was back in the late 70s. All I knew was I didn't want to go into business. And I played sports. I played tennis. I taught tennis for some years and graduated college, traveled, was up in Boston area, went back to North Carolina for a night in, I think it was like 1980, 81 or so. I spent the next 4 years not in Durham, but around Durham and Chapel Hill, Carborough, Hillsborough. It's where I started playing fiddle, worked in a bookstore, waited tables, and thought I should be writing. I had written a couple short stories, but it just didn't seem to be the thing that I was doing. But I felt like I wanted to and I could. And I think it was 1984. So it's 41 years ago. I had bought a van. I had an idea to write a story that I was stuck and couldn't write, and I didn't know where I would do it or how. I ended up in fall of 1984 driving in this van, ended up in Seattle, Washington, wrote a story there that I'd been wanting to write, wasn't so good, said, okay, this isn't my thing, I guess. And then a few months later, early 1985, with a relationship not working out, I wrote another story. I said something clicked, and that story was so much better and felt more authentic than anything I'd written before. And when that relationship didn't work out, I kind of went, what next? And I needed to go further, and further from Seattle was Alaska, where there was an MFA program in Fairbanks. Got there and got my MFA as a fiction writer. And but I wasn't ready to leave Alaska. And I've been an Alaska resident now for 40 years. I'm not in state much now, but I was full time. And folks who are out there, if they know Alaska, Fairbanks is in the interior. I've lived in Fairbanks, Juneau, our capital, Sitka, Nome, back to Juneau, and in 1998 moved to Anchorage. And since 2001, I've been touring. As far as the novel, I started writing it after I finished the MFA program and in 1989, I started the novel by mistake. I thought I was writing a short story that turned into a novella that turned into the beginning of the novel that I finished, thought I finished, quote, finished in 1997, and it didn't get published till 2022. And then there's another edition now. So it's an odyssey in my life, but also that novel.
That's amazing, Ken. Alaska is about as far away as you can get when you're in the United States.
Oh, it's far, and I've been to some far places, especially Nome when I lived there for a couple of years.
That's amazing. So, um, tell us the story behind the book.
The story behind the book, it's kind of the story behind the book is you mentioned that I have a short story collection out, and I was
Right.
finishing that short story collection in the late 80s. And I thought I would write a short story set in a cold place. That was all that I meant to do. And I started writing what became the opening novella in the novel, where I thought it'd be a 10 or 15, 20 page story. In about 4 days, I had a 75-page novella that just came out, and set in Fairbanks, which is, once again, it's in the interior of Alaska. Fairbanks, if you don't know your Alaska geography, it's the second biggest city in the state. And yet in the mid 80s, when I was in grad school, I lived in the second biggest city in Alaska. I was 5 miles from downtown, 5 miles from the college, and living in the woods in a cabin with no running water. And in 2025, you can still live like that in Fairbanks. So I was writing a short story set in Fairbanks. And that year, 1989, I had graduated. I was living in Juneau, our capital. And that story just got away from me. And I thought, oh, I've written a novella. And about a year later, I realized, no, there's more to that. And it became, the first section is 7 years in a young man's life in Fairbanks at the time. Now it's a period piece from the late 80s, early 90s, but then it was current, and it was 7 years in this fella's life. The second part that's set in Juneau is 7 hours of a woman's life, and it's all set in one day. And then the last half of the novel is set where the man from the first section and the woman in the second session had met. There's one sentence or two sentences in the first two sections in the second section where they've actually connected, but the last half is where they've met and or end up in Nome for a winter. And it's like kind of 7 months. So 7 years, a guy in Fairbanks, 7 hours of a woman in Juneau, and 7 months of them being together in a very difficult environment in Nome. And I wrote it from 1989 to about 1997, living, starting out in Juneau. Then I was in Sitka, Nome, had an illness time, and finished it when I was back living in Juneau. And then I've toyed with it, as writers who are out there would know. It, you're always working on it. Wasn't able to get published, wasn't able to get agented right away, but I tried. And I always felt like the novel, definitely, it was worthy, but this is a hard business. I mean, everything's hard when you're in the arts, it seems like. And there's a couple stories about how it finally did get published.
You're right about that, particularly for first-time authors.
Sure.
Some people start self-publishing and then they decide, oh, okay, I can do this. And that's fine.
Yeah.
There's some excellent self-published books out there. What's interesting is that you are a musician and an author. I have had I've signed authors who have written music, and then we've pulled a book from the music. One was a children's book, but you've done the opposite. You wrote the book first, right? And
Yeah.
then wrote the CD. Could you please hold up the book and the CD?
Sure. The book is here. Let's see. And what's interesting is that the cover that you had and the opener, this is a different cover, and I can talk a little bit about that. And the CD is the same CD as the original cover. And but it's the fella who, and we write, it's fiction, but I've lived in Fairbanks, I've lived in Juneau, and I've lived in Nome, and there's also some traveling, in other places in the state, but I've lived in all three communities. And the protagonist, the fella, he's not me, but he shares some of my characteristics, including playing fiddle. So there's a lot of music. And Fairbanks, which to this day, Alaska's, if people don't know Alaska, it's every state, West Virginia, Texas, Montana, California, every state is its own place. But Alaska is more than double the size of Texas, and there's only 750,000 people. And the novel, it kind of tries to take all these places in, because I've lived in these places, And the fella plays fiddle. So and because there's in Fairbanks, when he arrives in the state, he falls in with a community of musicians, and there's a lot of music in that first section. So I thought, boy, I should make a CD. And the CD though is a little bit different in that I've already made a bunch of CDs, and because they talk about fiddle tunes, I called some tracks from earlier CDs that had just fiddle tunes that were traditional, that would be the kind of tunes that these people might be playing. There's also in the novel, there's a band called Potluck that's three women in Fairbanks. And I have a friend who grew up around Fairbanks, who now is a noted musician in Austin, Texas. She plays fiddle, but she also sings. She plays guitar. And I just told her name's Beth Crispin. I said, Beth, do you have any orphan tracks that you are not using for any of your own recordings? Because then I could put that on here to make it sound like, oh, this is kind of like, some of the women I'm talking about in the novel. Here it is on the CD, even though it's not quite the same. So it worked out that, and then I put in an original, I played on mandolin, something called the Fairbanks Cabin Waltz that I liked recording, and I like playing it in public in mandolin. So I recorded that on mandolin to put in there, and then one last tune that was an original of mine. But it worked out to just get a sense of, when I sell the book, I go, oh, here's the CD that goes with it. I'll throw that in, or, people give me another few dollars, and they have something that understands what the music is like that they're talking about.
That's really interesting. I think people appreciate the combination of the music along with the book. You've gotten some wonderful reviews from Review Tales magazine, from Reader's Favorite. They're saying that the book is fast paced. It's really a great slice of life and a good read. So you have other books. Are they all poetry collections?
A lot of poetry collections. I can do a little, but one more thing I wanted to say about this
Sure.
too, that you were talking about, Kathy, is that with this is that when I had the first edition, I don't have a copy of that cover right away, but it was published through a fluke. And actually, there's this poetry collection called Leftovers and Gravy that I got an email that I wasn't even sure how legitimate it was. It was during the pandemic, and it was somebody from the country of India. And I'd already had, I think, 10 or 11 poetry collections already. And this fellow who I didn't know, just said, well, I'd like to publish one of your poetry collections. And I'm thinking, like, this doesn't seem quite right. But I looked up the organization. It's cyberwit.net, I think is what it is. And it's they're out of India. I looked it up, and there were people that I knew who had been published with them. It was during the pandemic. I thought, well, I'll send them a collection of poems that I'd already put together that I thought would be really difficult to have published. And they published it, and during the pandemic, and I was able to, because I'm known in some ways, I was able to sell a few of them, and people really liked that collection here, this Leftovers and Gravy. And then the fella got in touch with me again, said, I'd like to publish another of your books. And I said, well, while I may have another poetry collection out that I could give you, I have both a novel and a short story collection, and I'd really like to have them published. And I sent him, as he asked, 50 pages of both. He said, I'll do either of them. And that's how this novel came to be. But that first edition, the publisher mainly published poetry, and it was really a struggle with both the culture, distance. There were the first edition, it came out well enough, but some of the comments, even though there were some good reviews, were, where are all these places? So this new edition, I made sure I put a map in there, a couple maps of Alaska, so people would get a sense of where these places are. And I was able to put in those early accolades. And as we know, even though I had a publisher, the cyberwit.net, it was so hard getting it formatted that there were, how to put it, there were enough typos that crept in because we like changed things and had to, there were things that were difficult that didn't, there were some more issues that it didn't, I don't think affected the readability, but it wasn't ideal. So I have a publisher in Michigan that, Ridgeway Press, that has been very, I don't do all the books with them, but I do some. And he said, I'll publish this. And so the new edition has the map, has some of those early accolades that were not like the back cover blurbs, which I solicited, but people just said, hey, this is a really, we really like this book. And whatever, I don't know if we got every last typo out, but there's maybe a dozen, whatever the dozen or 2 dozen in the original edition, they're not there now in this edition. That's
Well,
how that happened. But just to mention,
I can tell you there's no such thing as a perfect book. It
no,
doesn't matter how many proofreaders. We have a proofreader that reads back to front, so you don't get caught up in the story. And still the truck arrives and they unload the books and you open the first one and there's the typo.
you
So
always see,
we do try.
we try. And but I've had a number of books, the poetry collections. I have 3 kids books now. One of the books that anybody would be interested in is this The Writing Party. That's my creative writing manual. Interesting. The fella who published this, I heard of from a friend of a friend. He's a singer-songwriter, poet who only publishes books by touring musicians, and he's the former poet laureate of the state of Oklahoma, a guy named Nathan Brown. And he published this, and this has been really helpful. Whenever I do a writing workshop, I invariably sell 1 or 2 of these. The memoir I don't have right in front of me right now, but it's about my life as a touring artist. I have another memoir that I think will be out in the next few years. I don't have a publisher yet, but if I'm stuck, my publisher in Michigan will publish it. It's about jobs and money. The short story collection is new. It's called Men, Women, and Food, which is kind of goes along with the novel in that I finished it in soon after graduate school and could never find a publisher, hadn't won contests. But the early response, it hasn't been reviewed. It's not even officially out till another couple weeks, but it's in my hands now, and it's nice to have it out there in the world. And other poetry collections are, let's see if I got them here. My very first book was set in Nome, Alaska, called Nome Poems. It was published by West End Press out of Albuquerque, distributed by University of New Mexico Press. Went through 2 editions, and the publisher declined to do a 3rd edition, so I took it over. It's set in rural Alaska, and I'm also I hesitate to say, but I'm also a plane crash survivor. So some of the plane crash poems are in this and in some of the other collections. This is my my second collection. It's called To Live on This Earth. It's also set throughout Alaska. And I have another one that I don't have right in front of me, but I also have written a lot about sports, tennis poems, baseball. My father played college football and was a golfer, so there's some of that. So there's even a section of Alaska sports poems in this. And I think I have now 17 poetry collections, the 3 kids books, the memoir, the novel, the short story collection, and the creative writing manual makes 24. And I have more that I think will be coming out in the next few years.
That's amazing, Ken. You're very prolific. That's for sure.
Well, thanks, Kathy. But you know what I say? I say first I'm old, and then while I've had partners and been in relationships, I've never been married and I have no kids. So that's these. I think of these books, and I have 12 CDs. The CDs, the books, and the touring and the performances are kind of like that's what I've done. I mean, I'm in my late 60s, so it's it's what I've done. But I'm glad I have, quote, a legacy of sorts, and I'm really happy that I've done enough that I can be on something like this and share with you and your community some of what I do.
It's wonderful. Okay, you've mentioned so many things I'd like to hear stories about. Let's start with plane crash victim.
Okay, do you want a poem or do you want what do you want with that? Do you want
Whatever you would like. You could read a poem or you could give us the Reader's Digest version.
I'll do a little story too. I do a lot of visiting in schools. And last week today I'm in northern Nevada. I'm in Elko, Nevada, which if you don't know Elko, it's actually kind of a famous town in that it's about midway between and the biggest town between Salt Lake City and Reno on I-80. And in late January every year, there's this big cowboy poetry gathering with music, more of some rhymey cowboy poetry, but there's also some other work there too. And it's actually, I've done events, not at the big gathering, but other times too. It's a great place for me when there's not big events going on. There's really clean, budget motels. There's good restaurants or good enough restaurants for sure. So I'm just getting caught up because a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference in Milwaukee. Last week, I was in schools in Eastern Oregon. And I mentioned that because when I was working with the high schoolers, in addition to showing some of these books that I say, these are the books that have been published. Before that, I self-published chapbooks, and I had 26 chapbooks over the years about different subjects. And one of them was just plane crash poems. And when the kids are asking questions, one of the questions was, can you talk about the plane crash? And I can talk about it, but what I do with kids is I have pictures. I'm not going to show them here, maybe another time, but I have pictures of the plane, what the plane looked like after the crash, which was, I was on tour. It's almost 30 years ago. It was early March 1996. And I was starting to do this work that I'm doing. And what I do with the kids, and this was a group of, I think they were 10th graders, or maybe about 25 or 30 of them. I showed a picture of the plane on tundra, on snow. It was early March 1996. I show a picture, I say, write one word. Then I show another picture of the plane, 2 words. And I have a number of pictures of the plane. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, 4 words. And then I ask them, I say, what's missing with this story? And actually the kids are invariably really bright. I go, well, they'll say, well, there's no people. And I go, well, yeah, I wouldn't show you those pictures if I didn't have pictures of what I looked like afterwards. So then I show another picture, 3 words of me in a hospital with a neck brace, with just a few days after the wreck, with my 100+ stitches. And I was concussed. I was very fortunate to be alive. It was just me and the pilot on a small plane. And then I show another picture of what I looked like a couple weeks after, 2 words, another picture, 1 word. It turns out 25 words. And they're writing something that is, with, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's 9 lines, 25 words, and something that's poem-like. And then maybe I'll read a poem here. I'll read one called After the Plane Crash for you, and you'll see. My second day in the hospital, a nurse I didn't know came into my room, shyly asked if I'd seen the bright white light. No, I said, then recalled that plane ride through zero visibility where everything had been white, grainy, gauzy white. And I'd meditated on that white, found it inspiring, ineffable, deep, was writing a poem in my head about white when we hit. And when I woke, it was to blood warm and wet down my face, the red rinse like a movie scene. It wasn't until a month later, feeling like me, that I began focusing in on light bulbs, headlights, small shiny brightnesses winking like stars. So this is it, I thought, and looked harder, taking every little last thing in. That's one plane crash poem. When I perform, I have a story I tell that is kind of sideways to the plane crash, and I'll do like a plane crash poem, And when I do the things a lot, Kathy, I don't have to look at the book. I have some of the poems memorized. This is a short poem that maybe you will appreciate, especially as, anybody who lives in a small town. Nome is not super, super small. It's 3,500 people, but it's 3,500 people where it's the biggest thing for like 1,000 miles, where it's a big place for the region, but it's a small town. And I have a poem that I will share at the end of a longer story about something else. It's called Nome Celebrity, and it's one I don't have to look at the book. 2 years writing, teaching, fiddling, and sharing all I could. I was known in Nome maybe as one of the crazies who rode a bike winter long. Then I walked from a plane crash. Old timers I didn't think knew me now greet me by name. I saw how others watched and whispered, and I let drunks touch me for luck. And the plane crash, I was on tour working in village schools. I'd been a college professor, had an illness time. On the other side of the illness, this is what I've been for the last 30 years. I've been a touring artist, musician, doing what I do, but I couldn't for a few years. And I was just getting back into being healthy again. And 3 weeks into a 5-week tour, I was in a community Brevig mission, a Inupiat Eskimo village. Wednesday, Thursday, I was in the school. I did an evening show. Friday was not able to get out because of weather, and these are small planes. Saturday could not get out because of the weather. It was March 2nd, but a plane landed. It was a cargo flight, and the teacher who I was hanging out with that Saturday, and these are really remote places. I mean, Nome is rural. Then you get from Nome to a village of a few hundred people that you only can get there by plane. And this teacher said, I heard a plane land on the runway. If that plane's landing, it's going to get back to Nome. He took me out. They call snowmobile snow machines out there. Went out in the snow machine with my stuff, cargo flight, the pilot dropped off the boxes. $80, I'll take you back to Nome. You're with school district. I can get you around. And it was bad weather. It was blowing snow early March. I was the only passenger on this cargo flight back to Nome. And the weather was sketchy. I thought the guy was doing a great job. We're flying over the frozen ocean, the sea ice, and virtually no visibility. And what happened is we drifted inland, and very, very both lucky and unlucky, we clipped a hill we didn't see. And so the plane, it hit and then hit again. And we were on the ground. I hit my head on the co-pilot wheel, knocked out briefly, came to. I remember saying, this shouldn't have happened. And then I remember saying, am I dying? The pilot was uninjured, but panicky. The one thing you don't do is crash. We crashed. And he said, I've seen worse injuries on hockey players, which did not make me feel very good. For about an hour, I didn't know if I would live or die. Yeah. But after about an hour, I go, I think if we get found, I'm going to live. And in about 3 hours, he made radio contact on the ground. We were found. We were about 20 miles from Nome in a place that the pilot wanted to run to town for help. As people said later, if he had left the plane, he wouldn't have survived. The weather was in the teens, blowing snow, windy, early March. So it's almost equinox. It was fairly light, especially that afternoon. And I was slowed down for about a year. I couldn't do the rest of the tour. I was in the hospital, but I am here today. And I've written, not extensively, but I've written probably about 25, 30 poems about the plane crash time.
That's an amazing story. I can't imagine. I'd say that you had a guardian angel with you in that plane for sure.
Yeah, we should have. And in fact, the pilot at one point, and there's a whole story with my relationship with the pilot. I can actually do a whole 45. I don't get asked to, and there's not reason to do it very often, but I can do a whole 45-minute, 50-minute set just about the plane crash. But the one thing the pilot said was, if we were 10 feet higher, we'd be drinking coffee in Nome right now. And I mentioned that to somebody in the next weeks, and he said, if you were 10 feet higher, you wouldn't have hit how you hit, but you were going to hit something. And it wasn't like it was a big mountain, but it was just, kind of small coastal hills, near the frozen ocean, which is, altitude 0. But,
Yeah.
it was like, 50, 100, 150 feet, 200 feet up. And we literally clipped a hill and hit again. If we had hit almost in any other angle, any other way, there's no story. We're both dead. I was the only passenger. We both dead, but we hit in such a way. So the pilot said, if we were 10 feet higher, we'd be drinking coffee in Nome. And somebody said, no. And everybody knows more about this plane crash than you do, and I was in it. So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
also part of the story.
That's amazing. Well, tell us a little bit about your musical tours. I didn't realize you did school visits. That's very
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
And for those of you watching now and watching later, I did post Ken's website address in the comments. So can they contact you through your
Oh, anybody
website?
can reach me in any which way. In fact, I just confirmed in February, I'm going to be in Oxford, Mississippi for 3 or 4 days, and including where I sometimes do shows. Not I can come places solo, but I often do shows with an accompanist or two, or sometimes I do a thing with a big troupe of musicians. So in Oxford, it's going to be at University of Mississippi. I think they have 1,000-seat theater. We're going to be doing 2 big school shows. We're doing an evening show in a smaller space, and then waiting to hear about radio. There's kind of a Prairie Home Companion kind of radio program out of Oxford on Thursday nights. We're waiting to hear about that. And anyway, it'll be a bunch of days. And I just got confirmed doing, sometimes bigger shows, and I do smaller ones in schools. I have, like I say, I have 2 kids CDs and 3 kids books now. So but the fiddling, I'll play a fiddle tune for you, and I'll do a poem about it. And then at some point, I'd like to read the first page and a half of the novel, because that's I do a show called Now Entering
Okay.
Alaska Time, which is the title of the novel. And when I read that, it kind of takes people to the place. But a
Well,
poem, I didn't start playing fiddle till my mid-20s, living around Durham, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I had a housemate who was a banjo player, and they had parties, and I was the boring housemate that didn't play. I worked in a bookstore, and one guy who wasn't so good left actually this very fiddle. This is 40 plus years ago. This is the early 80s. And the poem I'll do is called Old Time Fiddle Lesson. To learn, and this is kind of like an Alaska thing too, to learn, lock yourself in your fiddle in a room all winter and practice till you play with a twisty, heartfelt, rhythmic punch that approaches trance. Now, fiddling's not technical repetition anyone can master. It's the sound you make once you know in the blood you clog with your fingers, while that old devil music dances inside the box. And I like sharing that poem. I like sharing it when I'm playing with somebody in performance, because I'll have them playing fiddle, and the poem refers to their fiddling, and then I play, and it becomes like a little theater piece where we have twin fiddles. But when I start like I am like this, a tune that I like to play that I would play in Fairbanks is a traditional tune called Old Joe Clark. So I'll play that, and I got a chair is not ideal for what I'm sitting in for playing, but I think I can scratch out Old Joe Clark for you here. I think I got a tune though. Let me get the other fiddle. I think that fiddle got the case fell, and I didn't get it retuned here. I think this other fiddle will work okay.
well, while we're waiting for that, um, I'd like to remind people that they can ask questions in the comments.
Play the one tune there.
We
I'll see
didn't
if I
hear
can get
it.
this other fiddle in tune. It felt way off when I tried playing it there. So
Well, for those of you who have just joined us, we're talking with Ken Waldman. He is an author and a musician. He plays the fiddle, but the sound of the fiddle is not coming over the microphone, Ken.
oh, it didn't come over?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Why don't you read us the chapter from your book?
okay. Well, I'm not going to get this fiddle in tune, but it doesn't matter anyway. Yeah, let me read the beginning, the first page, page and a half of Now Entering Alaska Time. And most of them in the group had been kicking around town for years, friendly, but not what you'd call day-to-day close. Fairbanks was that kind of place. People came and went. You had your own work to do, and the way Zan saw it was if you minded your business and no one else's, you were smart. Smart. That was why folks moved to the interior, to live where people didn't meddle. Either that or they were putting distance from something. Zan came to Alaska after Debbie left him. They married his last year of graduate school in Pullman, class of '83. The next fall in Spokane, where he was teaching history at one of the high schools, Debbie visited Seattle one weekend and ran into an old boyfriend, Nate, and she didn't come back. The next June, Zan moved to Alaska. He was 28, had little money, loans out, and no job waiting. But he had this hunch, and that was 6.5 years ago. He never expected to stay so long, but each year it got harder to leave. He knew people, and the place grew on him. Sure, every place can grow on you, but it was different here, strange in its honesty. Fairbanks was powerfully honest. Zan loved the summer days that went on, the sky bigger than Montana and Texas combined. And then there were the winter nights. The winter did it to him, especially when it was 20 or 30 below and the moon was near full or bigger. He'd walk outside into a windless, dry cold that was sharp and clean as new cutlery. The first whiff would be like oxygen 10 oxygen or the frozen essence of caffeine. Next, before he knew it, the moon was winking, telling him to keep dreaming. He'd keep breathing slow and deep, shut his eyes, then open them, this time to the stars, and the stars would dance for him. Sometimes he got the lights. It was easy to forget that a few minutes without gloves, he'd frostbite his fingers. The town boomed and busted, first gold, then oil. Now it was mostly dreams. You wanted heights? Drive to Talkeetna, charter a plane to the base camp and climb Denali's 20,000 feet. You wanted land and a log house? Finesse a homestead, borrow tools, and start felling spruce. You wanted your dream job? It was there waiting. What took 10 years elsewhere took 2 in Fairbanks. But if you were down on your luck, if you were escaping to Alaska for the wrong reasons, that is, watch out. Calamity could strike hard and often. Zan had a friend, Jed, guitar player, who arrived in Fairbanks with a new wife, more than $50,000, and a plan for a meatpacking business. The time Zan knew him, Jed's wife left, his dad died, the business venture got tangled in legal problems, his cabin burned, his car was stolen, and his chainsaw jumped out of his hands, took a piece of thigh, and nearly castrated him. The last Zan heard almost a year ago, Jed was nearly broke and arranging to move back to Salt Lake City. Maybe Jed just had incredible bad luck, but Zan would rather think Jed had unfinished business in Utah, and Fairbanks was just seeing that he got back as soon as possible. That's first page and a half.
That's great. I know that, like many other places, Alaska is very challenging. It sounds like a really interesting book, Ken.
Oh, thanks.
Our time is just about up. I know
Okay.
you've got some events coming up. How about letting us know where you're going to be through the end of the year?
There's a few places. Let's see. I am this coming Tuesday, October 7th, I'm going to be in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm also, and I don't have that with me, I wish I had brought that in here. I'm co-editing a literary journal called The Nomad with a Salt Lake City writer, Rachel White. And October is Utah Humanities Book Festival month. So we're doing a Utah Humanities Book Festival event, I think in the West Valley suburb of Salt Lake City on Tuesday, October 7th. And then I drive to the West Coast, October 11th. I'm in Eugene, Oregon, a little coffee house gig. October 17th on the coast in a town, Bay City. I'm doing a duo show at an art center. October 21st, I have a birthday party, 4-book release event with a bunch of musicians at a place, the White Eagle Saloon in Portland. November 7th, I'm in Denver. November 11th, Pueblo, Colorado at CSU Pueblo. November 19th and 20th, I'm in Pittsburgh and Confluence, PA. And early December, and I'm going to be in Southern Illinois. I'm not sure the details. And the whole rest of the month in December, I'm in rural Minnesota through a residency. There's a town in Minnesota called New York Mills, Minnesota, and they bring in artists for anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. I'll be there for 3 weeks, the end of the year, getting caught up on some writing projects. And that gets me to 2026.
That's awesome. That's terrific. You're that busy. Fantastic. Well, we want to thank everyone for watching today. And if you'd like to get in touch with Ken, his website is www.kenwaldman.com. And Ken, the best of luck to you. And thank you so much for coming on Zoom into Books.
Thank you, Kathy, for doing Zoom into Books and for everything you do to advocate for the written word and for literature. You got a great lineup of a roster of writers. I saw I was on your website. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. We have a lot of fun doing this, and we have a lot of fans, and they like listening to people like you too.
Thanks so much.
Hopefully you'll come back again, maybe in the spring. Would love to see you again.
Sure. Thanks so much, Kathy, and good luck with all your projects.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back soon. Bye-bye.